Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day. Glad that you're here. Welcome to Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center podcast. I'm Dayal, along with Kishore Chandra and Achyuta Gopi, tuning in live from New York, along with our live virtual Zoom audience and all of you tuning in and listening wherever you are. If you're tuning in at home, thanks for being here. If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road. And we're just glad to be here. How you doing, Kishore? How you doing, Achyuta?
I'm doing great. I finally slept.
Good. Kishore has been is a chronic insomniac and has been struggling with sleep for the last I don't know how long, but he's getting through it.
Yep. How are you,
Yep.
Chuta?
He's not actually insomniac.
I'm not.
He's not. He just was. The full moon was going on. Today's the full
Yeah.
moon, at least in America. Changes in some other parts of the world. Like, I think it's tomorrow in India.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure how that works.
I think it's because of when the actual moon peaks in different places.
Hmm.
So
Mm.
because for us the moon peaks like 3 a.m. in the middle of today and tomorrow, we celebrate it today. But because the moon peaks much closer to their midday tomorrow, they celebrate tomorrow. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
It doesn't, but I trust it.
No, it makes sense.
It doesn't, but I trust it.
Yeah, they do it
I'm gonna
according
go
to
with it.
like the,
I'm
the
gonna go
moon
with it.
rising and setting. Other than that, I'm perfect. I mean, I'm well not,
You are
all things.
perfect, actually. I mean, that's actually a whole topic in and of itself. Everyone is perfect. We just don't know it yet. I I posted that this morning for the Bhakti Centers. I had to do some sort of wisdom post, and I was thinking about love, and I was thinking about I read this book recently, really really great book by David Rico, I think is his name. No relation to Dunya Rico. But he has this book called the five no How to Be an Adult in Relationships, and he talks about these five A's of love. Um, and two of them, one of them is accepting, and the last one is allowing, which is really hard. Allowing. He gives the context like for parents to allow. If we're trying to mold somebody into something that we think they should be, it's a hindrance to love, because love means to fully allow somebody to be what they are, and then to love them for that, rather than like I love you when. And so I put this post that said learning to love means learning to accept, which means learning to allow people to be something different than ourselves. And so I was thinking about that sort of. You mentioned that you're perfect, and that really the idea is that the soul is such that every living being is perfect, but at the same time we have these kind of working through it and through the material stratosphere. I don't know if that word works. That would be a normal place where Pasha would be like, and she'd be laughing. Like, you just use the word stratosphere. Does that even work? But the material stratosphere, and allowing space for people to work through their journey and loving them through the process. So we love you because you're perfect, and we love you because you're not perfect. Another great book, Brene Brown, Gifts of Imperfection. We're going to have a book list by the end of this. And so, oh, Chuta gave a laugh emoji on behalf of Pasha. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah.
How are you doing?
Me, I'm getting ready to go to London. I'm going to London on Sunday, and I'm filming a course. I've been thinking a lot about values because I'm teaching this course. It's called Living Your Values. And I've been thinking a lot about what it means to discover and learn and know my values, and what it means to express those values through my daily life choices, and what it means to communicate those values to the people who are important to me and live a values based lifestyle. And I've been talking a little bit about this with my wife, how um, life can very much feel like a runaway train at times. You ever have that experience where it's just like, how long can we go on like this? Like, how can we keep doing this? Like, where is the regularity? Where is the schedule? Where is the, putting the big rocks in first? And just recognizing that, like, we just have a lot going on. We just have a lot going on, like a lot that we're doing. I'm doing a podcast, and I'm, you know, in a leadership at the Bhakti Center, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And it's just sort of, how do you prioritize everything, and where do you prioritize, and how do you, I was reading this other book called Essentialism, where it's about like focus. One of the principles in this course that I'm teaching is that we don't need more time, we need more focus. Um, and that who's to say, if I had more time, I wouldn't just be spending it the same way I'm spending it now. And so this idea of just kind of, we talked about yesterday coming back to ourselves a little bit and checking in with ourselves. I don't know if that was yesterday or the day before. But I'm kind of just, I'm good. I'm really grateful. I'm busy, but good is my sort of my go-to answer, which is true. But I'm also in this place of just like thinking about what it means to simplify and focus. Um, like less is more kind of mentality. Where do I really want to focus as opposed to be splayed out in a lot of different places? Just kind of my thought process where I'm at. That's my answer. Good morning.
I think it's really interesting because we've been talking about yesterday we were talking about loneliness and being alone and being with yourself. And at one point we realized that somehow or another this whole thread of a conversation started with like juice fasting. And but it all really does tie in together, because something that came up from yesterday that I just thought of while Dayal was speaking was that I was saying that, when you take something out of your life, or when you, or like food or whatever, when you do a juice fast, or when you decide to do a japa fast, like you were saying, Chuta Gopi. Can't remember if I said this yesterday or the day before when you were here, Chuta, but the idea that you're not like you're removing something with the intention of replacing it with something else. And I think that's super important, because it's like what Dayal just said about focus and values. It's like what is the messy, unfocused, undisjointed parts of my life that need to actually just be removed, and what do I need to replace them with, right? And you don't have to think about it so dramatically, like I'm getting rid of this part of me. It's like, okay, how do I up level this part of me, or how do I change this part of me? And change is such an interesting thing, because when you I mean, change doesn't happen abruptly, and it takes a lot of time, and it builds over habits. And I think what's really sad, actually, sorry to be sad, but I think what's really sad is when people, a lot of people will say, "Oh, people don't change," people don't change. Change doesn't exist. And I'm wondering about that, especially while you were talking, Doyal, about values, because I feel like change is one of those things that does exist. I do believe in change, but there is also something that is drawing people to say people don't change, like they're still the same person, like they still have the same stuff going on. So I'm wondering what that dichotomy is between, like, yes, change and moving into our higher selves. That's possible. I believe it. But I'm wondering, yeah, like, what is keeping us from that change? And maybe it is focus, maybe it is habits. Not sure. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Do people change?
Do people
And
change?
if not, why?
Yeah.
I think this has so much to do with the intrinsic nature of the soul and this like lifetime after lifetime journey that we've been on. And I wrote a poem kind of along the same lines, and it's essentially recognizing that I have said to my supreme person for lifetimes, "Oh, I'll change. I'll change. I'll change. I'll turn back." Right? So originally, there's an idea that you've turned your face kind of away from Krishna. And so I kind of wrote it on the premise of, for lifetimes I've been saying I'll change, and now what if material nature is the one really holding my feet to the fire? Like, but people don't change. Who in the world is even going to believe you at this point? And the end of the poem ends with actually Krishna entering in and saying, I'll still believe. No matter what, I'll still speak up. I'll testify to the fact that this soul can change. And having somebody that believes in you can be incredibly powerful, especially when we're going through the hard times and making those mistakes. And I think sometimes that causeless unwillingness to serve, that adhering to, essentially we're adhering to values and characteristics and character in some way, shape, or form, either positive or negative. So sometimes we're incredibly adhering to those negative values. And I think sometimes it's, we're all looking for ways to get away from pain. And so sometimes we think that the pain of surrender is too much for us to handle. We've convinced ourselves that there's this pain in surrender. There's this void in surrender. There's an abyss in surrender. And if I dive into that, it's going to swallow me whole. Like there's this vacuum in the heart, but if I take a second and look at that, it's going to swallow me whole. It's like why we run away from loneliness, why we run away from looking at like past mistakes. When a relationship breaks down, there's sometimes we don't even want to sit with the feelings because we feel like that pain is too painful. I'd rather ignore it. And it's like, well, that's also giving you pain. It's like, but it feels like that's less, right? We're constantly choosing the lesser of two evils, or the lesser pain in a certain circumstance. And so I feel like, and I was thinking about that with values a lot, just looking at people who maybe were vegan and then are not vegan, or they kind of adhere to it and then they kind of don't. And looking at myself as a lifelong vegetarian, and why, it's because my values were anchored to something so much bigger than just what I think about at this moment, or what I feel at this moment, because the world is so much bigger than that. I can think I'll be an activist, and that's why I'll change my diet, my lifestyle. But then we get to certain points where we think, but the way this web of the world works is so entangled that me changing my diet can't create such a big impact. And then we feel powerless, which then causes our values to crumble. And so when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking about basing my values on foundations that are so much stronger than just what I think and feel today, or even what's happening in the world right now. So when we think about our relationships, when we think about all of these things, when we start anchoring them in spiritual values, which are definitely much more eternal, and they wind up holding up much stronger. I feel like this is why faith, even spirituality, religions, these are things that are lasting. Even with all the problems with organized religions, we see like spirituality has been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. People putting their faith in that, taking stock in it, because there's something so much more eternal there. And I feel like when we're looking at our values, when we're looking at what causes us to change or not change, it's where we're putting those foundations. Are we anchoring it in something much more lasting, something much more concrete, something much bigger than the trappings of this material world? Or is it all here? Because that's all fleeting. It's all completely fleeting. And so I think that whether we change or not kind of depends on, one, where we're seeing pain and where our fear lies in looking at that pain, and then where we're anchoring ourselves and our values.
Does that answer your question, Kishore?
Yes. It
Next
does.
question.
We're just interviewing a Chuta Gopi.
Chita Gopi.
Chuta, how do I change?
How do I change? How can I get my husband to?
Right? It's always like,
I
I heard a lecture.
Go ahead. Yeah. What'd you hear? Lecture on how to get your husband to
heard a
change?
lecture one time, and there was somebody who asked Radhanath Swami, a question kind of like that. You know, they're like, oh, Maharaj, how do you, if you see that someone is not doing the best that they could be doing spiritually, you know, how do you get that person to change? Especially when, you know, live in close quarters with that. Like, it was clearly a very framed,
I'm
oddly
asking for a
specific
friend.
question. Right? And so he's like, you know, how do you deal with a person who refuses to come up to the standard? Right? How do you deal with that? And I was just kind of like taken aback, like, dang, really? You just threw your significant other right under the bus. And Maharaj,
Got an
he took
elbow
us,
from their husband right there in the class. Like,
right?
what are you doing?
Yeah. So, and yeah, the husband was asking this question. You know, Maharaj, there's a question arising in my heart. And so Maharaj took a second, and then he goes, the same way that Srila Prabhupada is dealing with all of us. Actually, first he said was, the same way I deal with all of you. And I was like, ooh. And then he softened it. He's like, the same way Srila Prabhupada is dealing with all of us. And I said, whoa. It was like one of those like game changer moments for me, those aha moments where I was like, yeah, we're all so resistant to change in some way or other. And I think, you know, I think it's Hafiz. He said it so well. It's like, don't surrender your pain so quickly. Let it ferment. Let it change you. So I think that key to change, and even the key to spirituality, is like, don't be so afraid of the pain that we think is so much bigger than us, because there's also somebody on the other side who's bigger than all of it, bigger than the pain, bigger than the fear, bigger than all of it. So I think that sometimes we have to not be so afraid of the pain.
Mm. That's powerful. And also I was hearing those words, accepting and allowing. I was mentioning like love is that accepting and allowing that somebody sometimes we get upset when somebody changes. You know, they have those memes, you know, caterpillars looking at a butterfly and says, you know, you've changed, man, and the butterfly's like, we're supposed to, you know. Sometimes we get upset when people change, and sometimes we get upset when people don't change. You know, it's kind of like this lose-lose. When you change, you're going to upset somebody. When you don't change, you're going to upset somebody. But this acceptance and allowance for where anybody is. And I was also hearing that I was recalling this. There was um an organizational leader that was talking about trying to move his staff and his organization like a new vision of the future, and he kept trying to paint this vision of the future, and people were like, why do we want to go there, and like, why not, you know. And it was having a tough time mobilizing his crew, and he realized that he was spending so much time trying to like paint this picture about like where they need to be, and he recognized that like, actually, if I want change, we both need to be on the same page of that. We don't want to be where we are now. And I think that if people don't get to a place where I'm at right now isn't working, there's no impetus to change. And we sometimes see something and we try to force it on somebody else, but sometimes people have to come to their own timeline of like what's working or not working for them. And I saw this beautiful, I read a beautiful quote yesterday or earlier this day that we sometimes have to give people space to be who they are and then adjust our proximity to them accordingly. In the sense that, like, you know, we spend so much time trying to change somebody. And usually the reason why we're upset that somebody's not changing in the way that we want is because it's affecting us. You know, my partner isn't doing X, Y, and Z, and that affects me. Or I'm trying to kick this habit, and when you're not trying to kick this habit, it makes it harder for me, and I end up slipping back into old patterns that I don't like for myself. And rather than taking accountability for my own ability to follow a certain standard, I'm going to reach out to my left or my right and say, because you're not following, it's making harder for me to do it. And then it's actually like our own inability to just live life accordingly or be detached from somebody else's whatever it is. But then also, you know, adjust our proximity accordingly. And it doesn't mean that, okay, I'm in a relationship, my partner's not coming with standard, I need to leave. But it's like, what do I depend on you for, and what can I not? And just sometimes it's a physical proximity or an emotional proximity or mental or spiritual proximity. And so I think it's also that sense of allowing people their own timeline and allowing and accepting that people are on their own journey, and taking responsibility for my own and how I place myself around the people that are around me. Because we're not able to change anybody else. At least I haven't. Maybe you guys have. Can you guys change me? I love that.
I wanted to say that I really, that point that Achita made about sitting with pain and just like being more used to pain. It's such a, I feel like it's super important. Like let the pain ferment, like Hafez says, right? Because we live in a society that has literally catered to our enjoyment and hasn't given us the tools, healthy or sustainable tools to deal with pain in a real way. And if anything, it's really, it's kind of sensationalized pain to a drama or to something like this, and it actually becomes really confusing. And I'm going back to like a talk we had a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about like the Greeks in ancient Greece using the theater as a way to like what's it called, dissect or get rid of a social ail that's going on in society. And it's like I feel like people don't understand how important like the theater or like nowadays movies and acting, like all of this stuff is super important, and it really affects us on like a very deep and subtle level, because that's what we're watching and that's what we're learning and that's what we are now thinking. And it's not even like you're consciously thinking it, it's like really dug deep. And so therefore our ability to even sit with pain is so like numb in a sense. Like we might not even know how to do that or how to approach that, because I'm thinking about, I grew up in a Latino household, and so lots of uh, Univision television soap operas on at all times. And for anyone,
Telenovelas.
yeah, telenovelas. And for anyone who's ever watched a telenovela, it's very dramatic. It's extremely insane. I've seen some Bollywood stuff that's kind of like on the same level. I'm like, wow, okay, like you guys are getting it. And I remember like when I started becoming a teenager, adult, and I really started like thinking about these things, one of the first things that I thought about was like, this is like really bad, because I'm seeing the direct correlation between like certain members of my family or certain members of like my community at the time, like almost imitating what's being shown on the television, and it not necessarily being like going into pain or learning from pain or changing from that pain. It just becomes kind of a performance of pain or a performance of suffering, as opposed to like, I'm actually experiencing this, I'm actually grieving, I'm actually asking questions and growing and figuring out what's the way forward. And I feel like today with social media and the way that things are in the world, it's very much like that. It's much more a performance of whatever feeling it is that I'm having. It doesn't just have to be pain, as opposed to like me actually feeling that feeling. And this is what we were talking about yesterday. That's why this thought came up to my mind, Dayal, because yesterday we were talking about being alone with yourself and what it really means to be alone with yourself, like without the social media, without reaching for your phone, without just like alone with yourself. And I think that that scares a lot of people, myself included. That scares a lot of people, because then the artifices for performing are gone, and I'm kind of just like left with myself, and I'm left with like all of these uh, pain or uncomfortable feelings that we might not want to feel. I remember I had a therapist like a long time ago, and he gave me like this advice, and I hated it, but I understand it. At the time I was just like, no. He was like, you have to sit with your feelings and you have to feel them. And of course, when he said that to me, I was like, what do you mean? I was like, what do you
This
mean?
is our last session together.
I was like, what do you mean? I did end up firing him for a different reason. I was like, what do you mean sit with my feelings? Like, do you mean that metaphorically? He's like, no, I mean that literally. He's like, you literally need to just like sit for like 20 minutes without doing anything else and just like feel what you're feeling. And I was like, I don't know if I can, that's a tall order, but it's so interesting because we were just talking about that yesterday. And I feel like so many of us have actually lost that ability or are afraid of it, because it's not it's not shown in what we're watching, right? Or in society. And yeah, I think I'll end there because I've been talking a long time, but it's really, I'm like seeing this, it's really warped in a sense how we
Mm.
deal with pain, or not deal with it rather.
Imagine every telenovela ended with a 20-minute segment where all the characters are just sitting on a couch, silent, feeling their feelings,
Just crying silently.
just crying. It's just like 20 minutes of like, okay, that was a lot. That was intense energy. I know some mean things were said. I know that there was some, a lot of betrayals, but the last 20 minutes, we're just going to sit with our feelings.
Which is crazy because the episodes are really only like 22 minutes long.
Yeah. So 2 minutes of betrayal, 20 minutes of feelings.
Television gold right there.
Television gold. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Let's get some takeaways from Kimberly because we're reaching that end of today. What are we walking away with? And then we can hear some closing words from each person.
Today we're walking away with love is allowing people to be on their own timeline, accepting people on their own journey, and adjusting our proximity accordingly to that. Having someone believe in us can be incredibly powerful, especially if we're going through hard times or making mistakes. Anchor yourself on a foundation of lasting and concrete values. And I love what Achuta said of don't surrender your pain so quickly. Let it ferment, let it change you.
Beautiful. What are you guys walking away with?
I as we were talking, I was thinking about all the examples from Vedic Shastra of people sitting with their pain and people really sitting with their feelings of longing, feelings of separation, feelings of pain or abandonment or upset, obstacles, reversals. And so I think the one thing I'm taking away, and I guess we can get into this more, is that sitting with our feelings actually brings us closer to pure devotional service.
That's a cliffhanger. Looking forward to diving into that. Where that's going to be the pickup line tomorrow. Kishore, what are you walking away with?
I'm walking away with yeah, sitting with your feel. I really like what Achuta just said. It's a cliffhanger. Sitting with your feelings takes you closer to pure devotional service. But even before that, I feel like sitting with your feelings takes you closer to actual real sustainable change. Like to even make change happen, you need to sit with your feelings. You need to know what's going on. And then eventually you'll get to pure devotional service one day, I hope.
Um, I love what Kimberly phrased that love is allowing others to be on their own timeline. That's one that I'm taking away. Thank you guys so much for listening, for tuning in, for being here. We love you tremendously. We're glad that you're with us. And please be safe, be well. Tell someone that you love them. Tell us that you love us by giving us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcast. Even if you don't love us, just write it. Just put it out there. No, seriously, be kind, be well, love those around you, love yourself, and we look forward to tuning in next time. We appreciate you here, and be well. Bye-bye.